I'm so sorry, but I'll get back to to everything right now. Um, so, okay, let me go back to, sorry about that, guys. Okay, here we go. So we'll go back to our temperature and humidity. Okay, so we're talking about temperatures and heat. So your regular, um, your regular house temperatures are always good. Ideally, you want to keep your humidity about 50%, but I know in a house that's hard to one monitor as well as regulate that. So if you can just kind of uh, avoid keeping things and overly heated spaces, or uh, where temperatures fluctuate from cold to hot to cold to hot, where it's not um, a consistent temperature. Uh, that's good too. I mean, it can be, maybe it's 80 degrees, but it's 80 degrees all the time. It's not ideal, but that's better than being in a place where it goes from 60 to 80, 60 to 80. So, um, and mold, just a quick discussion on mold. If you do find something that has mold, a good thing to do is first you want to see if it's active or inactive. If you have an object that has active mold, you can kind of tell it's usually still damp and it looks like mold. It's kind of that fuzzy, damp kind of look and feel to it. I mean, don't touch it, but you can get a glove or something to kind of brush against it. If it's inactive, if you brush against it, it will be dry and it'll kind of start dusting off. So if it is active, a good thing to do is to get some parchment paper. You wrap the object in parchment paper, label, or just put it in pencil, like when you wrapped it in parchment paper, and then put it in the freezer. Put it in there for about a month, maybe 2 months, and that should stop the molding and make it inactive. You can kind of look at it, take it open, and test it to see if it has stopped the mold growth. So that's just something, a good way to do that at home. From there, there are some cleaning techniques. Without showing you, I can't really, it's hard to talk about, but a good way to do it so that you don't destroy it is take it to a professional, a conservator or restoration expert that knows how to do that. So next is pollutants, and this is the biggest thing that adds to detriment, to deterioration to your textiles at home, to any heirlooms, to any historic objects. Every day you get dirt and dust. I mean, if you dust your house, you know, you get that. Also, cleaning products with chemicals. Not saying to not use bleach or anything around your counters and stuff, but if you're going to be cleaning around, if you have a quilt on your bed, or if you have, you know, any kind of textile that's out, maybe on display, maybe avoid using, if it's like a doily on the table, avoid using pledge. Just use a regular duster or some water and then a towel to just clean and then dry it. And then you can place the doily back on top of the table. Paint, this is actually more like the older paints that have the really strong smell. If you are painting, I would suggest maybe taking any textiles or objects out of that room that you're painting to avoid any of that seeping into it. This also goes with if you're spraying Febreze or Lysol, those chemicals, they can get in and stick to the fibers, and that's detrimental as well. A big one is cigarette smoke. I think we all know that if you've seen like the picture I have here, it's been damaged by, or it's been stained by cigarette smoke just over years. It was in a location where smoking was prevalent, and so goes from that white to that kind of nicotine staining. So just like it would, just like you can see in other pictures, this is it's something that the smoke can get everywhere. You can see on walls where something's been covered in a house that smoked, like a picture or something. If you remove that picture, the wall is stained, but where the picture was around it hasn't been. So that's just a good idea to either remove the smoke or remove the textile from an area where smoking is prevalent. Pets is also for in your home. Pets, their fur, their dander, all of that can get on there. And that kind of adds to the dirt and dust, but I think specifically for homes with pets, if you have a bed with a quilt on it that you want to kind of preserve, maybe not allow the pet to either go into that house, into that room, or on that bed, or just remove the quilt and do that. You can also, of course, clean and dust. You can carefully vacuum. I'd use like an attachment to antique items that are not they don't have any wear or tear on them. If they're in good condition, I would go ahead and you can very gently do a vacuum on them just to kind of get top dirt off of that. And especially if you have pets, you can get cat or dog fur off of that. So what you can do, of course, just do regular housekeeping, clean and dust regularly. The natural cleaners, like you can use vinegar or something like that for around windows if you're spraying something with maybe antique window coverings. Just limit your windows and doors openings, is that all of that dust and everything from outside can come in and just cling to things. And of course, try not to maybe smoke indoors, or again, take those textiles out of that room where you're smoking. Okay. The next one is pests. The biggest thing I think that we all think of when we think of textiles and pests are moths. Mothballs are not the greatest. They do release this chemical smell, and it clings to the clothing kind of forever. So if you want to use mothballs, I would suggest maybe taking a different approach to that if you have moth issues. A common one that we might not think about in terms of textiles are silverfish and cockroaches. Termites are also there, but that's, I guess, if you only have a termite issue. But silverfish and cockroaches, they like glue. If you ever seen, like, if you ever open up an old box of envelopes and you've seen the sticky gone, get rid of them, because cockroaches and other pests have been in there. But they are attracted to the fibers, the glues, and especially like painted decorations, like brooches, beads, things like that. Some other things for like furniture or upholsteries or tapestry, woodworms, termites, and carpet beetles are the biggest ones. So those are things to just kind of be aware of for your house. Some of these, of course, regular housekeeping, and then your pest prevention or pest control. When you have your house sprayed, that's a good way, of course, to keep bugs and insects and pests out of your house. If you do find something that has a pest issue, what you first want to do, kind of triage it, take that textile out, take that object away from all your other objects. Either if it's like a coat in your closet, just take it away, remove it from your normal clothes as well as your heirloom textiles, and just either put it in a box, or you can cover it and put it elsewhere. And that's another way to keep pests out, is you just put if you have something hanging, like a coat is kind of the biggest thing we think about, like wool coats. If you have a covering on a hanger, you just make a cover, or you can buy a covering to just cover it, and it keeps most of especially moths, out of it. So again, kind of as we were talking about it. Oh, yes.
I just had a comment or a question, but
Sure.
I noticed on your list of bugs, bed bugs were not listed, but my mother had a terrible infestation of bed bugs in her entire apartment. And I just want to mention that even though the treatment, the pest control people came out like 7 or 8 times, they were not using the proper treatment. For some reason, you would think they would know that the only thing that kills bed bugs is heat. And they kept spraying chemicals and chemicals and chemicals, and it never killed the bed bugs. And they would not allow me to take anything from her closet. All of her clothing and all the things I wanted to keep had to be thrown in the dumpster, all of it
Oh
thrown away.
no.
So just
Oh,
beware that for anybody that does have some kind of a bed bug or bug problem, that they're doing the right thing as far as the chemical treatments. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
okay. Thank you for that. That's a good point. Because oh, that's a shame. I'm sorry. Well, I bed bugs. Um, Again, I know that sometimes there you get them. There's no way you know how you got them. So that's another issue. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes the only way to get rid of them, like if you have them in bed clothing, is just to get rid of the bed clothings. And unfortunately, now if it is like a heirloom textile, if you have a quilt on that bed, I would try everything I could to make sure that that got you can because you can take it to be cleaned by a professional. You can do that, and it'll at least kill them, if not get you might not get rid of all of the remnants of it, but you can at least get that killed. So, um, so yeah, thank you for mentioning that. So I guess for another way of storing them to make sure, I mentioned hanging, but a big thing is actually all textiles, because they're fibers, most of them natural fibers, they stretch. So the best way to care for any textile is to lay it flat. Now, in a house, that is, of course, not exactly feasible. So, so we do have different ways to care for them. If you want to store something as flat as possible, a good way to do it is a kind of a bigger textile type box, and that way you can fold it appropriately. You can use tissue for padding and keeping like tissue, like if you fold the arms over. Um, and uh, to where you have any kind of folds in that clothing. Um, Boxes, of course, I'm going to suggest archival boxes, the museum quality archival boxes. Um, but I also know that's not quite feasible in homes. You're not just going to go out and get one. You have to go online, figure out what you want and what size. If you have whatever boxes you're using at home, if it's cardboard, that's not the best, but I do understand. What you can do is get archival museum quality tissue, the acid-free or acid-free, lignin-free, and unbuffered is the best for textiles because it's the matte kind. Most of your historic textiles are going to be natural fibers, and this just helps keep them safe and stabilized. You can line that box or whatever box or container you have with that tissue, and then keep that in there, and then just change out the tissue. And that, of course, it's kind of temporary. So that's why I have this picture. You have your tissue paper, you have a good sturdy hanger, you have muslin for any kind of coverings, and then some cotton batting. That's a good way to also protect if you're hanging. So first of all, there's boxes. Plastic boxes for your house. I'm gonna say to not, if you can avoid plastic boxes, avoid them. I understand that if you are keeping them in a place that may be prone to moisture, if it's completely sealable, that's okay. Again, I understand it's at home, but you don't want to, because your textiles, they're from living fibers. They want to breathe. So if you can avoid that, I would. And that way it'll just keep them from discoloring and deteriorating quicker. Cabinets and closets, of course, are the best place to keep your textiles preserved. But I also understand if you have a quilt and you want to lay it out, a bed is a good way to do that if you can mitigate some light and usage on the quilt. Quilts are kind of a different type of textile too, because we want to use them to remember them and remember the people that made them and why we have them. So that's kind of a different type of textile in and of itself, because they have their own history. So hanging storage, a lot of clothing is usually hanging storage. If you have clothing in good condition, like coats, military uniforms, even dresses, if they're not pulling, if there's no pulling and they're nice and sturdy at the shoulders, and there's no deterioration that you can see in the rest of the garment, hanging does help provide more room and storage space. So, excuse me. So I would get a good sturdy hanger. This is a wooden hanger, but what I would do so that the wood doesn't off gas and transfer to the clothing, cover it in cotton batting and then make a covering with the muslin. And that's a good way to just help also pad that hanger and you can do that with any hanger, but that's a good way to pad the hanger for that garment. And then to further do that, if you would like to make or buy a covering, muslin is a great fabric, cotton muslin, great fabric for all textiles to store in. And if you want to make a covering for that to help with either sunlight or any kind of light, dust, pests, and just handling, like as you're moving a hanger, that kind of helps keep your finger oils off of that while you're trying to preserve it. So, and also the natural fabric helps it breathe, again, like with the boxes. So.
Yeah. Lauren,
Oh,
it's
yes,
Joe.
ma'am.
Hi. What would cause, I had two special dresses, one from when I was, believe it or not, 12 and a half years old. It was made out of taffeta, gorgeous dress.
Oh.
And another one was my mom's dress from her reception when she got married. And
wow.
I knew I was never going to wear it, but I wanted to preserve them. And I did so for many, many years. And I did just about all the stuff you're saying here. And yet they still got discolored. In particular, the taffeta was white, and it was definitely at some point turned yellowish. And I thought, what am I saving this for anymore? And I eventually threw them out. I didn't know what else to do with it.
Oh.
But I had done most of it. What would cause it anyway? Is there?
Well, I will get to that, go more in depth to it. But first of all, taffeta is silk, and that has its own inherent issues. Now there are going to be, because again, these are living fibers. This is something that they have their own off-gassing and discoloration. And basically what we're doing is trying to mitigate that as much as possible. And in some things, silk, we'll talk about silk in just a bit, because that's its own type of, it has its own special problems and issues with it. They have some things added to them that might help it'll get yellowed faster, or there's no stopping it. So what we're doing is just trying to stabilize and keep objects. What we're talking about is stabilizing and keeping textiles as close to original condition as possible. There are some things inherently that are going to happen no matter what, like yellowing. And unfortunately, now if it's like one little stain that's discolored and then that's different. That's a stain, that's staining. But like if the entire thing is getting yellowed, that's inherent in the garment. So, okay. So as we're talking about it, so first we're going to talk about some of our common textiles. Let's talk about quilts, because I know most people anyway, have quilts. I know I do. This is one of mine from my grandmother. So I know a lot of times, because quilts are so pretty, they're so special, they're interesting, or they mean something. It was made by your great grandmother for your grandmother's wedding, something like that. It's, there's just so much that with a quilt that it has its own history in so many ways. Even the patterns mean something. The fabric within the patterns mean something. Maybe it was made from baby clothes of that person. It's all, they all tell different stories for different people and for different families. It means something to your family. So the biggest thing that people do with quilts is they go and they get them cleaned. Not saying that's wrong, just that you want to be careful, because especially with older older fabrics and older fibers, you have to be careful with how they're cleaned. You need to be as gentle with them as possible so that they don't stretch, they don't start to tear, and they don't, because we don't know always what type. There's usually cotton, or some kind of variation on cotton, so it's not necessarily a mystery. But for example, I have a quilt that was made probably around Reconstruction. And I know this because the fabrics are from during or before the Civil War. So those you never know exactly, because usually a lot of these quilts are from scrap bins. The older quilts. The older quilts are from scrap bins. I'm going to say probably pre-1950. A majority of them were from scraps that you kept to make quilts. So you never know what type of material necessarily you're going to be is going to be in there, or how old it is, and it can be varying ages. So it's just something you want to be careful. So spot cleaning, depending on what's wrong with it, spot cleaning is a good way to do that. And try to use water only at first, because water is fairly, especially to fabrics and fabrics that are in good condition. That's a good way to just start and see from there. And if it needs to be completely cleaned, again, it depends on what it is. If it was, I heard a story of a salsa being spilled on a quilt, and basically it wasn't cleaned ever. And of course, things started growing on it. So that's a whole different thing. You want to make sure and clean it, but I would just maybe hand wash that entire with very low chemical soap, to just make sure and get that out if you can. But otherwise, try to just to not take it to a dry cleaner. Dry cleaners, it's a chemical clean, so that of course starts deteriorating the fabrics. Storing, again, for quilts, if you want to lay it on a bed, this is kind of a personal thing. I have, again, quilts are personal. And if somebody doesn't remember that quilt, then it means nothing to the next generation or the next person that's going to get it. So if you want to use the quilt, I have no problems with you using it. But laying it flat is the best. So I know there's these, you have these kind of quilt holders that you fold it over, or fold it over the back of the foot of the bed or something like that, that actually starts pulling those fibers at top. And if you have light, of course, that starts, you get this line where it was folded over. So, and also you'll start getting the batting sinking at the bottom. You get this heavy bottom where everything's kind of sunk to the bottom on each side. So again, if you can have it flat on a bed, I personally have no problem with that. Another way to store it though would be you do this tri-fold. You get the, if you can see in the pictures, you fold it into thirds, and then into thirds again to where it's in this little roll. If you have kind of a quilt that has some pulling in it, I would suggest putting tissue. So if you see in the picture to the left, there's a roll of tissue in between each fold, and you would do that for every fold through the quilt. And you just put a rolls of tissue, so that would kind of prop it up a little bit so it doesn't pull as much when it's folded. And you can either get a box, and put that in there. Or a good way to keep them, and this is how I store all my quilts, is they're in cotton pillowcases because it lets them breathe, but it keeps dust and other things off of it. So, and then if you have some things that you're not sure about your quilt, if there's some tearing, wear, some just, you know, destroyed parts, a quilt rest, taking it to a quilt restorer is always a good option if it's something you definitely want to keep and to pass down. It's something to look into. Any questions? Another big thing I've seen in home collections, military, anything, military heirlooms. So uniforms, of course, are a huge thing, and that includes jackets, shoes, hats, the ties, the full dress uniform to fatigues, and then of course you have independently, sometimes on the jacket, but also independently, medals and ribbons. And then there are flags, and there are different types of flags that you get. Of course, there are the funeral flags, as well as some, you have a flag that was taken and then kept by whoever was in the military. So there are different ways to store these. Uniforms, like any garment, if it's sturdy enough, hanging is usually a really good way to do that because they are, of course, much sturdier. The other way is to get a box and then line with tissue and fold it over with tissue under the arms where it's folded over, or under the shoulders, I guess. And then keep that in the box as it was. And you put the pants either underneath or on top, just folded. The hats, like this one, a lot of the dress hats are like this. A good way to keep that is if you just get some tissue, crumple it. Don't push it to where it pushes up the top of it, the crown of the hat, but just kind of give it as full support. And you can even have it to where it comes under if you see just the bill of it, so that it's all supported and kind of like a hat mount, so that it's not resting on itself, and it just kind of like a pillow of tissue. So that's the best way to put that. Flags, if you have a full flag that's not folded, I would suggest rolling it if you can. You just take tissue and roll it, and that's the best way to store a flag. The funeral ones, of course, usually in displays, and I would keep those folded. And if you have, you've seen the displays, the triangle displays. If you have them in a wood case, I would suggest making sure it's kind of lined so that the wood doesn't off-gas onto the fabric of the flag. But there's no, because those are meant to be displayed, those are meant to be seen. I would keep it however it is that you have it stored. So here we are. We're going to talk about clothing and just your all other clothing aside from uniforms. The clothing that is in all its common materials. You have cotton, wool, silk, synthetic blends, and then not necessarily, and then the kind of the unusual ones, leather and fur. It's not unusual, but they're not woven, they're not dresses, they're not anything like that. But so I'm going to first talk about silk because this is what this picture is. This is a jacket, or it's like a stole of kind of like a little bolero type of jacket with a fur lining and then, or fur edging, and it's silk. It's a crepe silk. It's brown, but you see how it's been torn apart? That's called shattering. That is silk shattering, and silk shattering is caused. This dress is from 1930. This is silk, I guess historic silk or antique silk, had different weights to it. And so what you think of in silk, you have like the taffeta silk, you have satin silk, you have crepe silk, you have the thin silk, that's all been weighted with chemicals to make it either that that texture as well as the sheen to it. The shinier, the more weighted it is, and that was weighted with like metallic chemicals. Nowadays, it's if you have silk, it's with synthetic blends, so that you don't necessarily have the shattering issue. But because of the chemicals in it, it makes that silk, one, discolor more easily, as well as whenever at some point, and we never know when, because this process cannot be stopped, it starts to shatter, as you see in the picture. And once it starts to shatter, I mean, there's nothing to stop the shattering. You can just kind of help the object be as stable as possible. And you can't reverse that ever, because it's inherent in the fabric. The weighted silk has that chemical reaction going on that over time makes it discolored, as well as starts breaking it apart. So usually in museums, if it's gotten to a point where you still want to show it, or it's gotten to a point where it's still kind of able to handle, I guess, and you want to keep it in a way that's going to be handled appropriately. We call that encapsulation. You take some I lost the word, but some, not tool, but I'm sorry, I've lost the word. Take a fabric that's see-through and you encapsulate it so you can still see the dress or the garment or the silk that's in it, but you keep it all together and make kind of a bubble, a fabric bubble around it. But that's not exactly practical for home use. So yeah, unfortunately, silk, especially historic silks, they're at some point, I mean, all you can do is just keep it as comfortable as possible and make sure that you can look at it, enjoy it, and maybe have some pictures and the stories that go along with it. Yes.
I have a good story, but I want to ask a question.
Okay.
My father-in-law's family had invested in silkworms at the turn of the century, in 1900s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but there was a crash, just like with other things, and so they lost everything they had. This was I want to say right around 1930, and you just mentioned 1930.
Mm-hmm.
Are things that were made then, or right before maybe, or in your knowledge, more valuable because of all that going on, or is it now less valuable? You know?
Value in textiles is interesting because I feel like it's more who it belonged to versus what it's made of, unless of course there's like precious metals and gems embedded in them. That's, so there's that value. But valuing garments is hard because usually it's designer or person related or associated. So yeah, so if you have textiles and you think there's something valuable with it, I would say in a monetary way, that's something an appraiser would be able to tell you. I'm more of a person that, in my training and everything, I find the value in it because of what it is. And so it's valuable to me because of what it is. But that doesn't necessarily mean that has a monetary value to it. So if that is something that you are interested in knowing, an appraiser would be more knowledgeable of that. So, but yeah, if it had a historical significance, especially, that might be something to look into and do some research for. But 1930, I say like 1930 just because this was 1930, and as as we progress into the 20th century, things are blended with synthetic fibers so that the weighted silk, I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but that's not something that you see commonly anymore. What it is it's held up, natural silk is held up with synthetic fibers to make it stronger and make it the weight and give it the weight and sheen that it needs for whatever garment it's being made for. Excuse me. So the things are that cotton, wool, silk, and fur all definitely need a place to breathe. They're all natural fibers that if you have them anywhere, this is where like the plastic boxes are really a big no-no for these fibers, because they need to breathe. They need to be able to off gas and have that. They don't want to be enclosed in something and just have their own off gassing circulate around them. They need to be able to breathe. Synthetic blends are a little different because, well, of course they're man-made fibers. They can tend, depending on what it is, it can tend to be more prone to fire as well as embrittlement. And so if you've seen like old polyester, it kind of it doesn't hold up to time very well, as well as like vinyl and those types of things. It just doesn't hold up to time. Not saying that they're bad, just that you have to, maybe keep them, make sure they're flat, make sure that they're in a place that's not going to get a lot of outside contact with anything, so that they can kind of stay as stable as possible. Leather is its own thing, a little bit, because you have so many different things made out of leather, and it can be just an embellishment on a garment, just like this fur jacket. This is an embellishment. It's not a fur coat. It's a fur edged jacket. And so leather can, if you have anything leather, of course, like shoes or a handbag, that it can start getting brittle. So you condition it, you polish it, you make sure that it's not going to get hard and unwearable. So leather, if you're wanting to keep it, again, like everything else, keep it out of light, keep it away from pests, keep it away from dust. You can put them in boxes, like shoes, you can put them in boxes, or a hat, boxes. Jackets, if they're in good condition, again, hanging. If they seem to be getting brittle, there are two camps in this. Some say don't condition, some say do condition. I think it depends on what you want to use it for. If there's, like, say it's a leather jacket and the inside is silk lined or wool lined. If you're going to condition it, you need to understand what's in the conditioner and if it's going to be touching that lining. So it's just something that you're going to have to, if you're going to keep wearing it, of course, you want it to look good and to actually be wearable. So you're going to try to keep that leather as supple as possible. If you're going to be just kind of keeping it, it's never going to be worn again. That's something that you're going to have to, it's going to have to be a personal call on that. Fur, it likes to attract pests. I think we all know this. I think we know the cedar closets and everything. Those are, of course, great for, if you have a cedar closet, those are great. I would, of course, keep a cover over it so that you don't have the wood touching. But ideally, fur, it needs to be worn. Take it to a professional cleaner to get it clean if you want to wear it. If you have heirlooms with fur in it, keeping them in a cool place is best. Of course, it's kind of a leather, a leather material type of thing. Um, it, it needs to, you know, cold helps preserve always. So anything kept in a cooler temperature is going to be more well preserved. There's also with fur, if it does get an infestation, again, you need to separate it. And I would suggest one, taking it to a professional cleaner to get clean. And then freezers are, of course, great. If you have like a chest freezer that you're not using, or you can just lay on top inside a covering, that's a good way to just at least get the bugs out. Then you can take it out and get it cleaned. So I'm trying to think. Wool, of course, prone to moths. Cotton, we have all sorts of, I mean, there's all sorts of different types of cotton and strengths and in all sorts of different clothings. Those, I would say cotton and wool, from my experience, have been the easiest to care for and preserve. So as long as you treat them nicely, they tend to stay all right. Of course, depending on how old and what the dyes are in them, they might have more chemical than not, depending on what the time period is. But you know, earlier, of course, it's more natural dyes, so you know, there's less to worry about. And part of that is, of course, types of clothing that you're going to be looking for. You have wedding attire. That's a huge part of heirloom textiles. Wedding dresses can be kept in boxes. If you get a big enough box and just fold it the right way and support with tissue paper in the creases, they will stay a while. They'll stay for a long time. Formal wear, like you're saying, the reception dress, that's or your childhood dress, that's something, of course, a lot of people keep for memories. Children's clothing, this is more kind of like baby bonnets, or like the old long dresses that both boys and girls would wear as the baby clothes. Coats are a huge thing, because a lot of times you would have only one nice dress coat, and usually they're wool or fur. So that's something also that a lot of people have. Those you can either keep in a box or hung up, depending on how good a condition it is at the shoulders. Then you have hats, shoes, gloves, and handbags. Boxes are the best for these. That way, you know, you can take them out whenever you want, because these are rarely used unless you use an old handbag or hat from time to time. But I would say a box is the best way to preserve these. And you have things like Letterman jackets or old school uniforms or cheerleading uniforms or something like that. Those can also be common, or I've seen as common things that people keep in their closets. Again, you're gonna, if it needs to, if it's falling apart, I of course keep it in a box. Otherwise, hanging in a supported hanger with a covering, if you choose, is the best way to keep those. And any of the hats, of course, you like if you see this baby bonnet, I actually have tissue in it to kind of support it so it's not completely flat. Shoes, if they're kind of caving in, you can put some tissue paper in the toes. Gloves, I would just keep flat, because the fingers, you can't just, I don't know, there's so many different types of gloves too. You have anything from kid gloves to silk gloves. It just depends. Handbags, you have anything from like the metal mesh to beaded to crochet to leather, so to canvas, or even like the carpet bags. So this is just a matter of, you want it to keep its form, so putting tissue inside is a good way to keep it from caving in on itself. If it's the metal mesh, lay it flat. as well as a beaded. Keep it flat as well, and keep it in a box. Some other textiles you'll have around your house. You have upholstered furniture, and of course those will be used. Tapestries and rugs, and then furs, because there's just, it's its own kind of thing, its own kind of animal, if you will. And they all kind of get treated a little differently. Tapestries and rugs, and upholstered furniture, these are all things we expect to be on display. These are all display items. They're kind of artwork that as much as we don't want them to be to be out in light or amongst dust and people, they're going to be, because that's what they're for. So just maybe keep them in a again, mitigate your light, especially from windows and doors. And the wear and tear, I'm not saying you need to cover your couch in plastic, but if you have something you like to keep, when you're not using it, put a cotton covering over it, like a sheet or something. If it's in a special room, if it's something you're not wanting to use, if you don't use a lot, then I would keep it covered just to keep the dust off. Rugs, that's a different thing too. Depends, because there's anything from just antique rugs to, you have the oriental rugs that are just so, fine and just beautiful, that you want to preserve. But at the same time, you want to use them. So that's something that, of course, you keep clean. Don't vacuum like usual. Use the extension of the vacuum to vacuum those if you do actually use them on your floor. And just be very careful and carefully vacuum across it with the extender. Tapestries, they're like artwork. If you can keep it in a, if it can be framed with a UV glass, that's a good way. But I understand some are enormous and you want to show it off. Again, kind of treat it like a rug. If it needs to be vacuumed, vacuum it, but mostly just try to dust it and keep in a space where it won't collect a lot of dust or be right in front of a giant window, I guess. So here's just some good supplies. I like Gaylord Archival has a good source of just kits for preserving. You can go to their search bar and just put in whatever, like wedding dress or uniform, hat, and they'll have that. They'll even have the kits that'll include the tissue paper, the appropriate boxes and everything, so that you don't have to buy everything separately. So this is especially for at-home preservation. So they have some good options for you for textiles of every kind, from flags to uniforms, wedding dresses, formal wear, suiting. They have everything, hats. And here are just some helpful links to help you out. Gaylord Archival is a good place to go. University products can be less expensive, not necessarily, but they can be, depending on what you're looking for. And their website's a little easier to navigate. Then I have included a couple articles on just preserving textiles at your home to be able to reference if you'd like. One from the National Archives, one from AIC and they have AIC, this one has everything on, it's a link to all the different types of objects you might have in your home to help with. And at the bottom, the Textile Preservation Services of Texas, or Conserving Threads. This is a textile conservator here in North Texas. And she she would be a good source if you have anything that you like preserved or displayed. Melanie Sanford is her name. She's a good person to go to. Oh, you get that.
That's good.
Right, so
I have another quick question and then I'm done.
okay, sure.
If something is faux leather or faux fur, does it need the same care or not really? Because it's obviously not the real deal.
It's not going to be the same care as leather and fur. It would be the same care as a textile, like
Okay.
synthetic.
Right.
You still want to try to keep it flat and try to keep it, you know, as stable as possible. But you wouldn't treat it like you would leather or like you would fur. Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I just was wondering because, yeah,
Oh,
I do
absolutely.
have some things that I've tried to keep in good shape, but
Oh, of course.
and
Yeah.
then the rest, of course, went in the trash. So whatever.
Oh.
Yeah, it was really a horrible chapter in my life. This is
I'm
last year. It was really
That's
bad. Yeah,
terrible.
yeah. Anyway, but thank you. This is great.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact Jessica or me, or I guess me through Jessica. So, um,
Keep up the good work.
all right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay. Take care.
All right. You too. Uh, okay. Sorry. Stop recording.
Okay.
Do I stop? Okay.